Welcome to Better Than Ever Live, wherever you're watching or wherever you're listening. Hope you're making today your masterpiece. In this live stream, we're going to talk about the gut and the gut microbiome. What is it? What should athletes and active people know about it? And why should they care? What sports and exercise benefits can possibly come from having a healthy gut? And how can you take steps to improve your gut? My name is Dr. David Geier, double board certified orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine specialist, and media medical expert. I help you feel and perform your best regardless of age, injury, or medical history. As always, please understand in this video, I'm not giving you medical advice. This is meant for general information and educational purposes only. Now, when we get to the discussion of gut health and exercise and the role of protein and carbs and all that in gut health, I'll answer, if you have any comments, leave those in the chat box. I will talk about those. I'll show them on the screen. I'll give you my thoughts at the end of the talk. But if you have any comments about the 3 studies we're going to talk about, and I think today's are pretty interesting. So leave those as we go and I'll address them. We'll talk about them as we go. If you wouldn't mind, leave your first name and where you're located. It doesn't have to be like your home address, just city maybe, or state, or what country you're in. I just like to know where people are, but leave those in the chat and we'll talk about that as we go. All right, our first study is something that if you watch this show for any period of time, you've heard me talk a little bit about. There's a study that was just published this week in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology that says if you swap out butter for olive oil, you might live longer. That's right. If you all you do is consume just over a half a tablespoon a day of olive oil, you're less likely to die of heart disease, which is the #1 killer in the US. You're less likely to die of cancer, you're less likely to die of lung disease, you're less likely to have Alzheimer's and other cognitive diseases than people who use butter or margarine, especially that cook with butter and margarine. And it makes sense if you think about it. We've talked on this show a lot about olive oil and all the reasons it's potentially good for you. And it's because of the nutrients that are in it that have been linked to longevity that butter just doesn't have. I'm not anti-butter. I think there's actually a role for some saturated fats, especially if you can get like grass-fed butter, not so big on the margarines and things like that. But olive oil is high, and this is one of the reasons the Mediterranean diet is thought to be so healthy. Olive oil is high in monounsaturated fatty acids, and those have been shown over and over again to be associated with anti-inflammatory benefits, lowering that systemic inflammation. It's good for our heart. It's good for our cholesterol levels. It lowers our cancer risk, all those monounsaturated fatty acids. But they've also been shown in research studies to prevent DNA damage, which again, as we've talked about, plays a large role in our longevity. Monounsaturated fatty acids in olive oil activate what's called SIRT1. It's a type of enzyme that plays a role in cell function, cell metabolism, and it improves lifespan in animal studies. Good to see you, 113. Good morning. Yeah, for us, yeah, I guess it is. It's sort of between morning and afternoon. Speaking of mornings, afternoons, evenings, let's talk about a study that just came out yesterday in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Internal Medicine. It's a study about sleep and eating, and what the study found is that if you get more sleep each night, you might lose weight. Now, it sounds crazy, but let me tell you what they did. Researchers took 80 people between the ages of 21 and 40. These were obese people, not lean people. Obese people between 21 and 40 who also, on average, on a regular basis, slept less than 6.5 hours every night. They counseled all these people, proper sleep hygiene, go to bed, wake up at the same time, all that kind of good stuff. And these people were sleeping at home. This wasn't done in a sleep lab. Their sleep was tracked with wearable devices. And what they found and even before that, before you say, oh, it was probably something other than the sleep, they kept their same diets, kept their same exercise patterns. Everything else is the same. What they wanted these obese people between 21 and 40 to do was spend 8.5 hours in bed each night. Basically try to increase their total time slept by over an hour, 1.2 hours. Then they track their calories, they track their daily energy stores. There's some different tests that they use to do that. What they found, this to me is fascinating. The people who increased their sleep, and the average increase in sleep was just over an hour, they reduced the amount of calories they ate by 270 calories a day. And before you say, oh, that doesn't sound like a lot, think about this for a second. 270 calories is about what you burn in 30 minutes of exercise, just by doing something you like anyway, which is to sleep better. But it's more than that. Think about 270 calories, not just for one day, but 5 days, for 365 days, for 5 years, for 10 years. That 270 calories, that's going to add up really, really fast and potentially lead to a lot of weight loss. So one big thing, and we've talked about why that might be a little bit. People who basically go to bed earlier and get more sleep tend to snack less, especially snack less at night. They tend to eat healthier foods, and it probably has role effects on our hormones as well. So take that for what it's worth, but sleep can be good for your diet and maybe for weight loss. All right, the most fascinating study of the day, this was all over the internet the last 24 hours or so. There's a new study from Edith Cowan University looking at, we've talked a little bit before about how little exercise you can do to have a health benefit. We've talked about high intensity interval training versus steady state cardio and those real short bursts of physical activity. I think I've even talked on this show before about the 1 minute workout, the book that sort of put high intensity interval training on the map. And you can basically do a 10-minute workout where there's 3 20-second all-out sprints. So basically a minute of hard exercise, and how good that was for your health. It's a fascinating book. You should definitely read it. Well, it may get even better than that. There's a new study that was in the Scandinavian Journal of Medicine and Science and Sports that showed that as little as, get this, 3 seconds of exercise a day, 3 seconds, can have a positive impact, not so much your overall health, even though it might, but on muscle strength. So what they did, 3 seconds, 39 college-age students did 1 muscle contraction. This is 1 rep. If you got a dumbbell, you're doing 1 bicep curl. Maximum effort for 3 seconds a day, 5 days a week for 4 weeks. 3 seconds is all they did. Now, what they did is they tested 3 different types of muscle contraction. They tested short primer and exercise science. They tested concentric exercises, which is the bicep curl, essentially, shortening the muscle. That's the contraction. It would be in leg extension. It's the up phase of a leg extension, that type of thing. They tested isometric contraction, which is the muscle never changes length. Basically, you hold, let me see if I can get this in picture, hold in a certain position, contract, squeeze as hard as you can for 3 seconds. And then there was a group that did eccentric contractions, meaning the lengthening phase or the negative phase of working out, doing a negative bicep curl, having all the weight up here and trying to very, very slowly let it down, trying to resist the fall of it for 3 seconds. Again, 1 rep, 3 seconds a day, 5 days a week for 4 weeks. What they found, that for those that did the eccentric bicep curl, again, the negative 1 rep, their muscle strength after 4 weeks increased 10%. The other groups increased a little bit, but not nearly as much. The ones obviously that didn't do that, no benefit. Now you think, all right, so be it. You get a little bit stronger. You're not going to get ripped just doing 1 rep of 1 exercise. But I would be curious to see if you did that 1 3-second rep for every major muscle group, what kind of benefits, how would you look, honestly? I would really be interested to see. But here's where I think this is interesting. One of the big problems as we get older, in our 50s and 60s and 70s, is a problem called sarcopenia. Basically, we lose muscle mass, we lose strength as we get older. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but that's associated with falls and balance issues and falls that lead to hip fractures and vertebral body fractures and wrist fractures and just overall decrease of vitality and ability to do our daily activities. So if there can be very, very easy and short ways to prevent that, that can be a good thing. So for what that's worth, that is 3 seconds of exercise a day. I can't imagine we're going to get less than that, but who the heck knows? All right, let's talk about the gut, because this is an important topic. And if you have thoughts on any of the topics we talked about before, leave those in the comments. Or if you have thoughts on gut health, definitely share those. I will say up front in this discussion, I know, or before I did this research, I knew zero about gut health. My practice is very big. The group I'm in, they're very big on gut health. The other physician talks a lot about it and counsels her patients on it. We have all kinds of supplements and detox cleanses. We've got this thing, I can't remember what it's called. The bottle is in the lobby. I just always keep forgetting to get one for myself, but they nickname it dirt water, and it supposedly has something to do with dirt, and apparently it tastes like dirt. It looks gross, but apparently they say everybody that does it absolutely loves how they feel on it. So there's a lot about this that I want to know, because I want to live longer and have a greater health span, feel better, things like that. But our gut's really important. It's important to our mood, because our serotonin and other mood hormones typically come from the gut, and so many other reasons I want to learn about it. So I did deep dive research on that, and I'm going to share what I got out of it for you in case you're interested as well. The challenge is that I'm learning this too, so we're both going to learn a little bit about this as we go. Here's something you probably didn't know. Our gut contains about 100 trillion microorganisms, stunning number. Bacteria, viruses, protozoans, microfungi. Now, a third of those gut microbiota, that's sort of the universal term for all the species in our guts, we share about a third of those. You find them in everybody, but the other 2/3 are unique. They're like sort of genetic fingerprints, so to speak, except with bacteria and viruses and things. And there's all kinds of things that can influence our guts and the bacteria and everything that's in it. Not just diet, that's obviously a big one we'll talk about. Exercise is one that we're going to talk about too, but it's things like being male or female. It's things young or old, genetics, race, using antibiotics, big role in the health of your gut. And then just whether or not you're a healthy person or if you're constantly fighting disease. And again, what bacteria we have is largely something that we get very early in life. Some genetic factors, but some related to things like delivery and mode of delivery, vaginal versus C-section, things like breastfeeding and things in our environment, bacteria in our environment. But as we get to adulthood, then it becomes things like diet, especially carb intake, protein intake, and exercise that we're going to talk about. Now, before we talk about how you influence it, we got to talk about why it matters. The gut microbiome is extremely important in our ability to absorb and metabolize nutrients, vitamins. It plays a huge role in inflammation, which I talk about all the time, huge role in our immune system and our immune function, and just generally our overall health. All right, so let's talk about some of the things you can do to potentially have a healthier gut. Well, first, without question, is going to be nutrition. And it doesn't take a lot to have a radical change. You could eat a bunch of junk for 24 hours or just one, and it just completely changes your gut. Now, it's reversible, but it can change really quickly. If you do it for a long period of time, you're going to have profound changes in your gut health. And that matters because our gut and the microbiome produce these enzymes that help us digest foods that our normal digestive enzymes in our stomach just can't do. And you're going to hear this several times, but essentially, there may be some benefits, and we've talked about keto and high protein, high saturated fat diets for a lot of reasons, but it looks like when it comes to gut health, maybe they're not so good. They seem to have, again, high protein, high fat diets, a negative impact on the lining of our gut, the lining of our colon, and can lead to what's called increased permeability. Basically, different things can get in and out of the gut lining, so you end up with bacteria that break down proteins that can lead to all these things like lactate and other compounds that are potentially bad for our health and harmful for our bodies, especially as it pertains to systemic inflammation. Again, that high protein, high fat diet. So when you look at protein and gut health, study after study that I found showed that the high protein diets that you eat, and a lot of athletes eat high protein diets, that's sort of the nature of, especially if you're trying to get more muscle, it changes your gut health. If you eat a lot of animal protein, it increases a species called Bacteroides. If you eat a lot of plant protein, it increases a species called Prevotella. Now, Prevotella is actually, we'll talk about in a minute, is good for endurance athletes. But high protein diets, they have been shown to have high rates, high concentrations of a number of compounds in the feces that are extremely bad for your health. Sulfides and nitrates that are potentially bad. Now, Carbs are a different story. You'd be surprised, but we actually have little ability, few enzymes in our bodies that can actually break down carbs. What happens is the carbs largely get through where they're normally digested in the small intestine. So what passes, and it's typically the fibers in our diet, pass through the small intestine because they're not digested. They get down to the colon where our gut microbacteria, microviruses, all of that, they use those dietary fibers for energy. They have all these enzymes that can break them down. So eating lots of fiber is potentially a really beneficial way to influence your gut. And then again, fat, sort of like we talked about earlier, there's a bacteria that fat inhibits in our gut called, I'm sure I'm going to butcher this, but it's something to the effect of Faecalibacterium. It's a species that has a number of anti-inflammatory effects. It's good for lean body composition and things like that. And again, low carb, high fat diets have reduced levels of that bacteria in our gut. So potentially that low fat, high or low carb, high fat diet might be good in a lot of ways, but it might not be great from an inflammation standpoint, at least as it pertains to our gut. All right. So our diet clearly affects our gut, but now this is where it gets interesting. Exercise can actually have a large role in our gut as well. There was study after study after study that I saw that physically active people who exercise on a regular basis, have a much more diverse species throughout their microbiome, their gut health, as long as you exercised on a regular basis. You have to exercise for about 8 weeks before you see those benefits. But the better shape you're in, the better your cardiorespiratory fitness, just overall, it's a better predictor of your overall gut health, more than how old you are, more than male, female, more than body mass, and if you're obese or thin, and more than your diet. Exercise might actually have a more beneficial role than all of that. And what happens is with exercise, it causes the bacteria in your gut to produce what's called short-chain fatty acids that have been shown over and over again to actually be good for our overall health. Now, it's not just exercise in general. It seems like different types of exercise and different sports play a role as well, especially because different types of athletes consume different kind of diets. So, for instance, if you're a bodybuilder, and bodybuilders typically low carb, high protein diets may not be as good for their health. They produce less of those short chain fatty acids than the endurance runners who typically eat high carbs and low proteins. Regardless, any kind of exercise is good for your gut, just again differently, but not just good for your gut in terms of overall diversity, but better health and better fitness. For example, the changes that come in your gut health from exercise have been shown to lower your risk of heart attack. They lower your risk of colitis, again, because of that anti-inflammatory effect, stopping that inflammation throughout your body. But it's also associated, the exercise-induced changes in your gut, better body composition, so more lean muscle mass, less fat, better VO2 max, which is a cardiorespiratory indicator, regardless of what diet you eat. But again, those benefits in your health, in your fitness, and everything else go away once you stop training. But also, exercise seems to be very, very good at stopping the bacteria or blocking the bacteria in your gut that are associated with systemic inflammation. We've talked so much about inflammation on this show and how it's linked to cardiovascular disease, it's linked to Alzheimer's in the brain, it's linked to arthritis in the joints. That may be one of the reasons exercise is actually thought to be good for arthritis, is maybe it's limiting that systemic inflammation. So gut health may be a very big thing to look at when you're talking about arthritis. Now, the other thing that exercise does for athletes and gut health is that it makes them better able to metabolize food nutrients, amino acids, carbs, things like that. And it increases, again, things like short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, acetate that are associated with just better fitness, but also better health. But there's always a but with these. There is a downside potentially with exercise and gut health. If you do a lot of endurance exercise in one session, especially high intensity, and we're talking hours, especially if you're out of shape or you're not in the level to do that kind of training, maybe it's in the heat, that can actually be a very, very big stressor on your gut. It can cause basically a lack of blood flow to the lining of your gut, cause things like GI pain, abdominal pain, nausea, diarrhea short term. but it can also increase what's called the permeability of your gut. It can allow bacteria, harmful bacteria, to get in, leave all these toxic byproducts that get into your blood circulation, your bloodstream, and cause that systemic inflammation. Now, you can sort of mitigate those effects potentially with things like probiotics. But again, especially if you're out of shape, that really intense long duration exercise short term can have a negative effect on your gut. So if you're one of those athletes that likes to go all out till your body's going to drop, just know that may not be the best short term for your gut health. All right, to summarize before we sort of move on to prebiotics and probiotics, exercise is associated with a more diverse microbiome. Very good, all kinds of overall health benefits. But if you exercise to exhaustion, you may have some negative effects on your gut health. Again, just short term, and maybe you can mitigate that with probiotics. Real quickly though, there are studies, and I found 3 that show that the more diverse your gut microbiome is, the more likely it's going to improve your cardiorespiratory fitness. We talked about how the better fitness you have, the better your gut microbiome, but it also seems to work the other way as well. Again, it gets back to some of the bacteria that we find in our guts have actually been linked to better athletic performance. There's one called Vianella. There was a study that looked at runners of the 2015 Boston Marathon, and the ones that were really good had a lot of that Vianella in their guts. It was linked to better performance in long distance runners. It also helps metabolize lactate. That's the burn you feel in your muscles when you're really pushing it. So in theory, getting rid of that lactate because of your gut health might help you perform better. Prevotella, that we talked about in people that eat a lot of plant proteins, is also thought to be good for endurance athletes. All right, so we've talked about diet, we've talked about exercise and how we can influence our gut health. Let's conclude with one last thing that you could conceivably do. And there's lots of things, maybe not taking antibiotics, and there's lots of things, but a big one that's getting a lot of attention in the athletic world now are supplements, prebiotics and probiotics. Now, until I did this, I sort of knew the difference, but I didn't really know the difference. But prebiotics are basically indigestible substances used by our microbiome for energy. These are things like inulin and oligosaccharides. They're basically sort of fiber for the bacteria there. You find them in breast milk, you find them in bananas, carrots, flax seeds, chia seeds, yams, asparagus, garlic, things like that. Those are prebiotics. Probiotics are actually live microorganisms, and if you ingest enough of them, they have health benefits. These are bacterial strains, yeast strains, typically what's already in our gut. That's what are in these foods. Lactobacillus, E. coli, things like that. They're in powders, they're in capsules. You can get them in yogurt and kombucha and things like that. Those are probiotics. Now, why this has become a hot topic in the world of sports, it's a lot of things. One, a lot of athletes have GI issues, and probiotics are thought to be good to prevent cramping, bloating, GI reflux, but they're also good for our immune system, decrease susceptibility to infection, and better immune health overall. And the thing with athletes, why that's such a big deal, it's not just the hours of training, it's not the races or the competition, that's part of it, but it's the travel, it's the lack of sleep, it's the overall stress of training and competition, but just overall stress in life. Athletes actually really struggle a lot of times with immune system issues, so probiotics are thought to sort of mitigate some of those issues, boost the immune system, and they've been shown to actually decrease upper respiratory tract infections in athletes. So that may be something you consider, especially if you're dealing with a lot of stress. We also talked about that gut permeability from excessive training, long periods of time, especially in the heat. Probiotic strains appear to improve that gut lining barrier. And again, they're anti-inflammatory, so they seem to help improve recovery from exercise, especially muscle damage. But it gets better. I feel like now I'm one of these salesmen, the late night infomercials, but there are also studies, and this is what caught my eye, athletes who take probiotics improve body composition, more lean body mass, better maintenance of testosterone. They didn't see nearly as much of an age-related drop in testosterone among athletes that took probiotics. They had lower cortisol levels, and we've talked about how cortisol is an indicator of our physical and mental stresses through life. the probiotics seem to decrease cortisol levels. They reduce that lactate that comes with hard training, that burn you feel in your muscles. And it's good for our brains. Probiotics increase synthesis of what are called neurotransmitters, these little signals that cross our synapses that are involved in memory and thinking and everything else, and they're good for our mood. So what can we make of all of this? Sorry, I've got to get some water. I apologize. Our gut is very important to our health. It's important for lean body mass. It's important for our fitness. It's in terms of cardiorespiratory fitness and performance, but it's good for our immune systems. And as I care so much about as an orthopedic surgeon that deals with osteoarthritis a lot and trying to lower inflammation, it is anti-inflammatory. So eating a diet, maybe not as much of a high protein, high fat diet, but a little bit more carbs, lots of dietary fiber. Exercising on a regular basis, just watch the really going all out for hours. And if you do that, maybe consider probiotics, and consider probiotics anyway. They seem to have a lot of potential benefits for us. All right, let's see. Jamie, good to see you again. And I don't know what to make of this. Blew my knee out on the shag dance floor. Good gosh. I feel for you there, Karen. Feels better when it works out. Thanks for the warm water pool. I would actually think, I bet the warm water feels good, but I would actually think an ice bath would probably be better for the knee. I don't know. Very interesting. Glad to have you here. I know gut health is something that is sort of a weird thing. It's something that's this mysterious thing not a lot of people understand, including me, but I'm trying to learn it, but could be potentially very good for us. All right, that is going to wrap up today's show. I'm headed to the office to see patients the rest of the afternoon, but appreciate you're here. If you like live streams and videos like this, definitely subscribe to my YouTube channel. Click the bell to be notified when I'm on live. I am going to start really focusing every Friday on YouTube, probably nowhere else, not Facebook and LinkedIn where this also runs, but on YouTube at 12 p.m. Eastern, not this Friday, but pretty much every Friday for the rest of the year. I'm going to be answering your questions. Knee, shoulder injuries, whatever your sports or exercise injury is, I'll talk about the injury. I'll talk about whether surgery is an option, whether other treatments are options. We'll talk about recovery, all kinds of good things. So make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Dr. David Geier. Again, ring the bell to be notified, but plan on Fridays, 12 p.m. Eastern. Even if you don't really have an injury, but you just like learning about these, those tend to be fun, and those, to be fair, it's kind of laid back because I'm just answering questions. So I hold up models. Sometimes I talk sports, all that kind of good stuff. But definitely check that out. On Thursday, we're going to go back to orthopedic injuries. We're going to talk about platelet-rich plasma on Thursday, and we're going to talk about how that may help tendon and ligament injuries, things like plantar fasciitis, rotator cuff tears, tennis elbow, Achilles tendonitis, patellar tendonitis, that kind of thing. We're going to talk about what PRP is and why you might consider it. We'll look at the science of how effective it has been so far, talk a little bit about why it's still considered experimental with 12 years worth of data now. Why is this still, the insurance companies still call it experimental? We're going to talk about all of that, so definitely join us for that. Thank you so much for joining us. Milton says thank you. Thank you for joining me, Milton. Really appreciate being here. Again, reminder, if you can't be here live, subscribe to Better Than Ever Live as a podcast wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I will see you